Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really going to tackle something huge. We're diving deep into the source material on this parallel secret war that the United States waged after 9/11. Across multiple continents, really. We're aiming for a structured look, but it's often, well, pretty shocking stuff. Looking at how American foreign policy, intelligence, it all got transformed. The traditional roles, spy and soldier, they were completely flipped upside down. And way beyond the declared war zones like Iraq and Afghanistan that people mostly heard about.
That's exactly it. What we're charting here is essentially a shadow conflict. It was fought with special operations troops, sure, but also proxy armies and what the documents themselves call killer robots, these armed drones.
Yeah.
And the core idea, the thing you really need to grasp, is how the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, shifted almost overnight from its traditional job, espionage, stealing secrets, into an organization that, as the sources put it, became consumed with manhunting.
Right, consumed with manhunting. And the sources, they show this shift wasn't just blurring lines between institutions.
No, it obliterated them.
Yeah, obliterated them. You had spies acting like special forces commanders, basically. And then special forces commanders trying to run global intelligence operations. This whole approach, it got a name, didn't it, from John Brennan, key figure in the Obama administration. He called it the scalpel versus the hammer approach.
Exactly, the scalpel. The promise was precision. This new kind of war would be surgical, quick, and crucially, it wouldn't have all the political baggage, the diplomatic messes that came with big military invasions. That was the idea anyway. But when you actually look at the evidence, the sources are crystal clear on this. This surgery without complications, it just wasn't reality. This way of the knife, as they called it, well, it arguably created as many new enemies as it had of old ones. And it completely bypassed the normal ways of going to war, the normal accountability channels.
Okay, so to really get a feel for how wild this transformation became, we need to start with this one incident. It's almost unbelievable, but it kind of encapsulates the whole 20-year shift. It's the Lahore traffic circle incident in Pakistan, 2011. Just chaos. You've got this clandestine CIA guy, Raymond Davis, big American fellow, right? Turns out he's also ex-Army Green Beret, former Blackwater contractor, a mix of everything. And he's stuck in a Honda Civic in this insane traffic. He ends up shooting and killing two men, claimed self-defense, said they pulled up alongside him.
Yeah, the sources paint a picture of just utter confusion. And it instantly blew up into this huge international incident. When the local police grab Davis, they find he's got a 9mm pistol on him, another gun in the car. And there's this jumpy video footage of his interrogation. Davis is frantically trying to say he's just a consultant at the U.S. consulate.
Yeah.
But the police, they dump out everything from his car onto the ground. And what they find is just bizarre. This collection of stuff that points to a much deeper hidden life.
Tell us about that stuff they found. It's such a weird, striking detail. What was in the car?
Well, they found a black mask, for one. Nearly 100 rounds of loose ammo. Photos of Pakistani military sites on his phone. And this piece of cloth with an American flag on it. It's like Davis himself physically represented this new hybrid warrior, right? Looked like a soldier operating under diplomatic cover, but actually hunting targets for the CIA in a country where the U.S. wasn't officially at war.
And the diplomatic fallout was immediate, catastrophic, really, because it basically confirmed every conspiracy theory the Pakistanis had about secret U.S. operations. The CIA director at the time, Leon Panetta, he was forced to lie. Directly to Pakistan's intelligence chief, General Pasha, denied Davis work for the CIA, and then President Obama, in a press conference, tries to smooth it over, vaguely asking for the release of our diplomat in Pakistan.
And that friction, that institutional clash, it just shows the immense pressure this new kind of war put on diplomatic ties. The sources actually reveal the CIA station chief in Islamabad was openly fighting with the American ambassador about this. He insisted they couldn't give an inch on Davis's identity. He was apparently completely frustrated by the diplomatic constraints messing with his lethal mission, and he just bluntly told the ambassador Pakistan is the enemy. So yeah, this one guy, Raymond Davis, he really was the face of the transformed, militarized CIA.
Wow. Okay, that anecdote really sets the stage. So let's unpack how the agency went from, stealing Soviet blueprints back in the day to gunfights in Lahore traffic. Before 9/11, the sources seemed pretty clear the CIA was mostly about classic espionage, stealing secrets, recruiting spies.
That's absolutely right. If you joined the clandestine service back in the 70s or 80s, especially after those big congressional investigations into CIA misdeeds, you were explicitly taught, almost indoctrinated, that killing was bad for business. It wasn't the agency's job. The leadership back then was convinced that getting back into assassinations would only, quote, invite trouble. especially given the history, things like Iran-Contra.
But 9/11 just changed everything, like dropping acid on the agency's old DNA.
Completely changed it, yeah. George Tenet, the director then, got a very clear mandate, pivot to manhunting. Now, so he pushed aggressively to build up the paramilitary side of the house. And he set up that whole detention and interrogation program, the network of secret prisons, the black sites scattered around the world. And here's a really crucial point for, accountability. Who was overseeing these life and death decisions? Who decided who got captured, killed, maybe tortured? It was an incredibly small group. President Bush, Vice President Cheney, and just a handful of others at the White House. Very tightly held.
And that aggressive mandate kicked in almost immediately, didn't it? The sources talk about this pretty chilling presentation right after 9/11. Two senior CIA guys, Jose Rodriguez and Enrique Prado, laying out plans at CIA headquarters, basically pitching the new assassination program. They called it the Project to Kill.
That's right. The plan was to insert small teams of assassins, basically, into other countries to hunt down specific people marked for death by the administration. And the way they presented it, they used these really close-up photos of the targets. Men like Mamun Darkazanli or Dr. A.Q. Khan, the nuclear proliferator. The visual message behind showing those close-up photos was described as eerie and unmistakable. It's meant to show competence. Look, we can get close enough to take their picture. That means we can get close enough to kill them.
That's a massive jump from traditional spying. Did the sources give any historical context? Was this kind of speed, this appetite for assassination, totally new for the agency?
They did provide context, and it's quite telling. They compared it to World War II. William Donovan, the founder of the OSS, the CIA's predecessor, he actually rejected a similar large-scale assassination plan back then. It was called the Cross Project. He apparently had already trained about 100 agents to go after German leaders, but he decided against it. He wrote that such a program would inevitably just invite only trouble for his new intelligence service. But in 2001, trouble was exactly what the White House wanted. Cheney's response to that presentation was reportedly just 2 words: get to work.
And trouble arrived pretty quickly, as the sources note, especially with the detention program. The CIA was catching these high-value targets, but then what do you do with them?
Exactly. That became the huge, painful problem. The detention and interrogation methods, they quickly got mired in controversy. Documented brutality. There was a May 2004 Inspector General report, it got leaked internally later, detailing a whole list of, quote, unauthorized, improvised, inhumane techniques being used by operatives in the field. The most famous example, the one everyone knows, is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the supposed mastermind of 9/11. He was waterboarded. Get this, 183 times.
183 times.
In a single month.
That number, it's hard to even process. But the sources also mentioned this almost absurd logistical side to the black sites. He said contractors were buying stuff from Target and Walmart. That's just jarring.
It really speaks to this bizarre mix, doesn't it? High stakes, global counterterror on one hand, and completely mundane bureaucracy on the other. These secret facilities, often in places like Romania, Lithuania, they needed constant upkeep. So yeah, contractors were literally buying toilets, bedding, earplugs, you name it, from regular American chain stores, flying it all out to secret locations. They even had to buy special flexible walls covered in plywood for some cells. The idea was to soften the impact when detainees, slammed themselves against the walls in desperation.
And the nicknames the officers use, that kind of dark humor operators have.
Right. At Guantanamo Bay, the CIA built this super maximum security facility. And the officers cynically called it Strawberry Fields, from the Beatles song, implying the prisoners would be there forever.
Yeah.
But this whole setup, this mix of brutality and logistical nightmare, it just wasn't sustainable.
So, okay, the detention program is creating huge legal problems, right? Fear of prosecution, it's unmanageable, logistically terrible international press. How did that lead so directly to the drones? Was it basically a strategic choice of, look, if we can't safely hold them, maybe we just eliminate the problem?
That's really the core of it, the fallout from the brutality and the very real fear among CIA officers about potential criminal prosecution under international law. It forced a huge strategic shift. Detention was messy, legally speaking. Trials would be public. Capturing someone meant long-term responsibility. But targeted killing, especially using armed drones, that seemed, well, cleaner, less personal maybe, and politically much safer for the leadership. So this shift was partly about bureaucratic relief, just making life easier as much as it was about pure strategy. The CIA started to see its future not as a jailer, but as a, quote, a military organization that could erase them. Lethal action basically became the path of least resistance.
Okay, so the CIA has successfully transformed itself, or been transformed, into this quasi-military killing machine. But meanwhile, over at the Pentagon, the military itself is kind of looking over the fence, envying the spy agency's tools, and, importantly, its authorities. Which brings us to part two, these intense turf wars that just erupted right after 9/11.
Yeah. And the key figure driving this from the Pentagon side is definitely Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. The sources say he was absolutely, quote, stung that it was these small CIA teams, not the huge U.S. military, that went into Afghanistan first. He apparently saw the Pentagon's reliance on the CIA for intelligence as frankly embarrassing. He even compared the military to little birds in a nest waiting for someone to drop food in their mouths.
That's a pretty dramatic way to put it, but it shows how determined he was to change things. Rumsfeld wanted the Pentagon to be more like the CIA, is that right?
He did. His goal was radical, really. He wanted to set up the military's own global intelligence capability, one that could operate secretly outside declared war zones, places that were traditionally the exclusive playground of spies operating under CIA authority. And to really understand the friction this caused, we probably need to slow down and quickly explain the legal boundaries he was trying to cross.
Yeah, that seems critical. Let's clarify the difference between the military's legal authority and the CIA's. What are Title 10 and Title 50?
Right. So the military primarily operates under Title 10 of the U.S. Code. That covers things like organizing troops, training, equipment, and crucially combat operations. It's about fighting wars. The CIA operates under Title 50. That covers covert actions, secret political influence, paramilitary operations, and espionage. Title 50 ops are extremely sensitive. They legally require the president to issue a formal written document called a finding, and specific members of Congress have to be notified. So there's always this layer of political oversight, which, frankly, was often seen as a bureaucratic pain by the operators. Rumsfeld wanted military-style action, but without that Title 50 oversight hassle.
And the Pentagon had actually tried something like this before, hadn't it? This goes back to that disastrous Iran hostage rescue attempt in 1980, Operation Eagle Claw.
That's the key historical precedent, absolutely. Eagle Claw failed partly because there was a critical lack of tactical on-the-ground intelligence from the CIA. That failure directly led, in 1981, to the creation of the Intelligence Support Activity, or ISA. This is the Pentagon's first real group of dedicated, deep-cover military spies.
And the ISA, according to the sources, immediately developed this toxic recipe. What made it so toxic?
It's just a perfect storm for controversy, really. You had a large, secret, black budget, which meant lots of money with little scrutiny. Combine that with minimal congressional oversight and leadership often consisting of hard-charging Army colonels who really didn't like being told no.
Yeah.
They got into hot water almost right away. For instance, they secretly supported James Bogritz's completely unauthorized private mission to rescue POWs in Laos. And historically, the CIA fought against this military spying constantly. They'd whisper to Congress that these Pentagon spies were just amateurs who were going to mess things up and blow carefully cultivated covert operations.
So the military already had this sort of proto-spy agency with ISA, but Rumsfeld saw something much bigger, much more powerful and independent in the Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC.
It's exactly. Rumsfeld really viewed JSA as the blueprint for the new model army. It was agile, it wasn't burdened by the massive bureaucracy of the conventional Army or Navy, and crucially, he saw it as a potential strike force, answering directly to the Defense Secretary. That meant he could bypass the Joint Chiefs, bypass the traditional service chains of command.
And he made this official in 2004 with this thing called the Al-Qaeda Network Execute Order. What exactly did that order let JSO do, and how did it cleverly use those legal differences between Title 10 and Title 50?
That order was the real game changer for JSOC. It massively expanded their authority to kill, capture, and spy in over a dozen countries, places way outside declared war zones like Syria, Somalia, Pakistan. And the crucial move, the legal sleight of hand, was how Rumsfeld framed it. He defined all these actions, killing, capturing, spying, as traditional military activities. By using that specific language, he tried to keep everything under Title 10 authority, the military's bucket. And that meant, in theory, they could avoid the need for explicit covert action approval that presidential finding required by Title 50. It was essentially an end run around traditional political oversight for spying and killing outside war zones.
Wow. So you've got this intense institutional rivalry. The military's trying to act like spies. The CIA's acting like commandos. That must have created absolute chaos on the ground, right? Deadly chaos.
It absolutely did. And the sources document several really tragic examples of communication breakdowns, basically. Take January 2002 in Afghanistan. A team of U.S. Army Green Berets raids 2 compounds. They believed they were hitting Taliban fighters. Over 40 people were killed.
And it turned out they had killed their own allies. Is that right?
That's exactly what happened. The intelligence task force running the Green Berets hadn't been told that the CIA, just days before, had successfully convinced those very same men to switch sides. They'd flipped them away from the Taliban, got them to fight for the new Karzai government. So the Green Berets ended up raiding the compounds of people who were now technically U.S. allies. Part of it was the fog of war, sure, but fundamentally it was driven by this institutional turf battle and a catastrophic failure to share critical, time-sensitive intelligence between the 2 parallel clandestine operations.
There's another example, too, isn't there? Equally frustrating, during the hunt for a senior Taliban leader, Mullah Khairkhwah.
Oh, this one is just pure bureaucratic sabotage, according to the sources. So American military helicopters take off to capture Khairkhwah. They'd intercepted a phone call showing he was trying to escape towards Pakistan. A CIA Predator drone was overhead, tracking his white truck, guiding the commandos in.
Okay, standard procedure. But the CIA actually had a completely different plan for Khairkhwah than the military did.
That's the crux of it. The CIA didn't necessarily want him captured or killed immediately by the military. Their plan was to have Pakistan's spy agency, the ISI, pick him up quietly. They hoped they could then flip him, turn him into a long-term, high-value informant. They prioritized intelligence gathering, espionage. The military's priority was immediate capture or elimination. So as the U.S. military helicopters got close to the target, the CIA drone operator was ordered to simply pull the drone off Khairkhwah's truck, just stopped tracking it, left the commandos completely blind without the satellite guidance they needed. Khairkhwah slipped away into Pakistan.
That is just astonishing. One part of the U.S. government deliberately undermining another agency's mission in the middle of an operation.
And the aftermath, as documented, is almost comical if it weren't so serious. The soldiers ended up arresting the wrong people, entirely 3 innocent men and a boy. They were held for several days, then finally released. And they were sent on their way with boxes of MREs, the military meals, ready to eat. But in this final kind of darkly ironic detail, the sources note the soldiers had carefully made sure to remove all the MREs that contained pork out of cultural sensitivity, even as they failed to get their main target because of interagency warfare.
So this chaos, these competing agencies, intelligence failures, it seems like it all inevitably pushed the shadow war towards one particular tool, a tool that could, in theory, transcend the need for messy ground intelligence or turf battles.
Yeah.
Armed drone, the MQ-1 Predator. Initially, the sources say many inside the CIA saw it as a blunt and unsophisticated killing tool, but it ended up becoming the weapon of choice for this secret war.
Yeah, the documents really trace the evolution of the Predator, from just a surveillance drone, mostly used over the Balkans initially, to a killing machine. The early tests happened out at Indian Springs, Nevada. It's called Creech Air Force Base now. And even the control panel itself showed how sort of jury-rigged the development was initially. The button to kill the drone's engine. It was apparently just a quarter-inch away from the button that launched the Hellfire missile.
Wow. They were literally just hoping the thing wouldn't fall apart when they fired the missile.
Pretty much. They had to run specific tests just to prove that the sheer force, the concussion from firing a Hellfire, wouldn't actually rupture the drone's relatively fragile airframe. But the real turning point, the watershed moment, according to the sources, was a test flight in February 2001, flown by a civilian test pilot named Kurt Hawes. What made that test revolutionary wasn't just that the missile worked. It was the absolute lack of danger to the pilot himself. Hawes was thousands of miles away. All he experienced was silence and a flicker on his screen.
He faced, quote, no risk whatsoever.
Exactly. And that single fact, that you could project lethal force without risking American lives on the front line, that signaled the start of a whole new era of conflict. That remote, risk-free capability was the killer app, basically. It ultimately overcame almost all the internal resistance.
Speaking of resistance, the sources do detail some pretty deep divisions inside the CIA about this shift, right?
Yeah.
James Pavitt, who was head of the clandestine service, the spies, he was strongly against it. Wait, so the top spy guys were worried less about the morality of assassination and more about just logistics and budget. Did money really dictate how fast this happened?
Well, to a large extent, yes. Pavitt's argument was fundamental. The CIA running its own Air Force. That wasn't what the agency was for. He kept asking, apparently, where's the money going to come from? These things cost $2 million apiece back then. So his resistance was partly about budget, sure, but also about preserving the agency's core identity and mission. Even the director, George Tenet, was reportedly ambivalent at first. He thought the military, operating under Title 10, should be the ones pulling the trigger. But then 9/11 happened, and the sheer allure of remote, low-risk killing just swept those arguments aside. The agency accepted, or had imposed on it, this new military identity.
And the armed drone, it became the perfect tool for this unacknowledged war, didn't it? Because it gave politicians the ultimate deniability. It let President Bush and later President Obama order strikes in remote places, camps, villages, without needing public debate, without risking U.S. casualties on the ground, and without having to formally declare war.
The strikes killed quietly. They rarely made the front page news unless something went really wrong. And this method, it was cheered by politicians, right? They could look tough, flex American muscle, but without the domestic political cost of bringing soldiers home in coffins. But the human cost. The sources really highlight this with the hunt for Anwar al-Awlaki.
Yeah, al-Awlaki was such a strange target. An American citizen born in Mexico, became this key figure in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, famous for plots like the failed Christmas Day bombing attempt in 2009, the underwear bomber.
His story is really a chilling one. He started out as an imam in the U.S., talking about being a bridge between Islam and the West. Then he radicalized completely, became this master propagandist for AQAP, editing their online magazine, Inspire. He ended up on kill lists for both the CIA and JSOC. The Pentagon actually tried several times to get him with drone strikes, but they failed. Faulty intelligence or targeting. Eventually, the mission was taken away from the military and given back to the CIA.
And the CIA drone strike finally killed him in Yemen, September 2011. But the sources emphasize the really tragic costs that came after that initial success.
That's right. Just 2 weeks after Anwar al-Awlaki was killed, there was another drone strike. It hit an open-air restaurant in Shabwa province. A group of young men were just eating there. And among them was al-Awlaki's 16-year-old son, Abdulrahman al-Awlaki. He was also an American citizen. He'd apparently left home trying to find his father. The strike killed him and several others, and that collateral damage really underscores the inherent lack of precision. The surgical claim just didn't always hold up.
Which brings us right to that core legal and moral fuzziness. The sources argue America never really had the tough conversation about this. Is a remote-controlled missile strike an act of war, or is it more like a state execution carried out without judge or jury?
That is the fundamental question, isn't it? Richard Blee, who was one of the early strong advocates inside the CIA pushing for this lethal authority, he later expressed deep reservations. He stated pretty bluntly, quote, "Every drone strike is an execution, and if we're going to hand down death sentences, there ought to be some public accountability. The fact that they're carried out remotely makes them politically easy, maybe, but it doesn't change what they are."
And the sources show the kind of immense psychological weight this put on government lawyers. People like Harold Koh, he was this prominent human rights lawyer, joined the State Department after being a fierce critic of the Bush administration's torture policies. Then suddenly, he's inside the system, having to justify these killings.
He was really caught in the gears, wasn't he? Koh described spending hours and hours reading these operational resumes of terror suspects, often just guys in their 20s, reading about how they were recruited, their first mission, who they talked to, all to help decide if they should go on a kill list. He actually noted, kind of starkly, that he spent about as much time reading those kill summaries as he had reading faculty papers when he was dean of Yale Law School. He was forced into this position of trying to reconcile his deep human rights beliefs with the immediate, relentless demands of this secret war machine.
So as the CIA got more comfortable, maybe too comfortable with lethal operations, they even started thinking about outsourcing some of the riskiest stuff, which leads us straight into the rise of private military contractors like Blackwater. After the detention program became such a liability, the agency actually briefly outsourced the assassination program to Eric Prince's company, Blackwater USA.
That's right. And Prince was very successful at poaching top talent from the CIA. Guys like Enrique Prado, who helped pitch that original Project to Kill, and Cofer Black, the former head of the Counterterror Center. They went to work for him. Prince pitched it as just, the natural evolution of warfare. He argued the U.S. has always used mercenaries, going way back. He offered Blackwater as this ready-made quick reaction force for assassinations.
And Blackwater people eventually got deeply involved in the drone program itself, too, didn't they? Loading the bombs onto the Predators and Reapers flying over Pakistan.
They did. But even this outsourced assassination program, run by Blackwater, was eventually shut down by the CIA. And here's where you see the real institutional priorities shine through. Why was it shut down? Not because of legal worries the CIA's own lawyers had apparently signed off on it. No, the decision came from senior officials who were worried about deniability. They realized, as the sources note, this painful paradox. Outsourcing gives you deniability on paper, maybe. But as one officer apparently put it, you also give up control. And if that guy screws up, it's still your fault. The risk of losing control of a contractor causing an international incident they couldn't manage ultimately outweighed the legal comfort.
Okay, so the CIA pulls back somewhat from outsourcing the actual killing, but at the same time, it was also pulling back from one of its oldest covert jobs, psychological operations, foreign propaganda, because with the internet, the risk of blowback, where American citizens might accidentally read CIA-funded propaganda meant for foreigners, which is illegal, just caked too high.
Exactly. That created this perfect vacuum. And guess who stepped right in to fill it? The Pentagon, still eager to play spy games. They basically took over the mighty Wurlitzer, the old nickname for the propaganda machine. And this is where we meet this absolutely incredible character, Michael Furlong.
Right, the sources paint such a vivid picture of Furlong, a diabetic, chain-smoking Pentagon civilian known for speaking in this almost impenetrable stream of military acronyms and jargon.
He was key in driving the Pentagon's new influence campaigns, and he relied heavily on private contractors to do it. His choice of contractor was, well, memorable, a company called U-Turn Media, which before landing Pentagon contracts had apparently specialized in peddling softcore pornography online.
That's just absurd. So what were Furlong's schemes actually trying to do? What was the goal?
They were aiming for what Furlong called an intelligence bonanza. For example, they developed these mobile phone games targeted at audiences in the Middle East. The games had a dual purpose. On the surface, they were meant to subtly influence how users saw the U.S. But secretly, they were designed to collect data about the players specifically, their cell phone numbers, maybe location data. All this information would then get fed into military databases for complex data mining, trying to map social networks, identify potential targets or assets.
And this unchecked ambition led directly to a major diplomatic incident, right, in Europe, of all places, really showing how loosely Furlong was operating.
Oh, yeah. The Prague incident. So in 2007, Furlong's command, SOCOM, quietly shipped these computer servers over to Prague. These servers held the sensitive databases, including information collected on American citizens, which is a huge legal red flag. And they housed them at the headquarters of U-Turn Media, the porn company turned propaganda firm. Critically, they did this without telling the Czech government, a NATO ally, or even the U.S. Embassy in Prague.
I can only imagine the absolute panic when the CIA station chief in Prague finds out there's this secret, unauthorized U.S. military data operation running out of some dodgy contractor's office in his city.
It was a potential diplomatic catastrophe just waiting to happen, especially because at that exact moment, the U.S. was trying to persuade the Czech government to let them build a really important missile defense radar system there. The CIA saw the huge risk, immediately breach of trust with an ally, potential massive public scandal. They basically stepped in and, according to sources, effectively had Furlong kicked out of the country, told him to get on the next plane out of Prague.
But Furlong wasn't finished, was he? He just moved his operation. And apparently he held a pretty deep grudge against the CIA after that, found a new patron in the military hierarchy.
That's right, he landed on his feet. General David McKiernan, who was commanding forces in Afghanistan and was reportedly deeply frustrated with the quality of CIA intelligence there. McKiernan approved a $22 million contract for Furlong to provide, euphemistically, atmospheric information, which really meant human spying. Furlong then fired the original contractors he was supposed to work with and boasted he'd found his real operators, his Jason Bournes, in a network run by someone he called the Old Man. That turned out to be Dewey Claridge.
Dewey Claridge, a total legend from the Iran-Contra scandal days, running a private rogue spy network from his home office in California.
At age 77, yeah. Claridge was running this whole thing from his modest house in Escondido, California. Special operations officers apparently joked about it, calling it Escondido 1. He was using Hushmail, which is a commercially available encrypted email service, to send his intelligence reports straight into military databases, funneled through Furlong's team back in Kabul.
And this private network then waded directly into the ongoing institutional turf war. Who did they decide to target?
They went right after the CIA's most important and probably most controversial asset in Afghanistan at the time, Ahmed Wali Karzai. He was the half-brother of President Hamid Karzai, and he was reportedly collecting millions of dollars from the CIA for providing information and influence in southern Afghanistan. Claridge's network compiled these detailed dossiers on Ahmed Wali Karzai, accusing him of being deeply involved in corruption, the heroin trade, basically trying to paint him as toxic. Military officers then tried to use this dossier in a campaign to get him sidelined, removed from power.
But the CIA fought back to protect their asset.
They did, successfully in the end. But the whole episode is just staggering, isn't it? A rogue private spy network run by this aging Cold Warrior out of his California home office, funded by the Pentagon, actively trying to undermine a key CIA asset in the middle of a war zone. It perfectly illustrates the complete breakdown of institutional lanes and control. And inevitably, all these blurred lines, these privatized operations, the constant institutional fighting, it all reached a kind of breaking point in Pakistan. Pakistan was really the most critical and the most volatile epicenter of the entire shadow war.
Right. The sources are clear. The U.S.-Pakistan relationship was just fundamentally broken, defined by conflict, because Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI, was playing this incredibly complex double game.
Exactly. The ISI made this crucial distinction between different militant groups operating on its soil. They actively nurtured and protected certain proxy groups, like Lashkar-e-Taiba, because those groups focused their attacks on India, Pakistan's main strategic rival. On the other hand, groups like al-Qaeda, which directly targeted the U.S., well, the ISI sometimes tolerated them, sometimes hunted them, often depending on shifting priorities. CIA officers who were working out of secret bases inside Pakistan, they were explicitly warned by their own leadership. Don't tell anything to Pakistani Army intelligence, meaning the ISI, that you don't want to get back to the Taliban. They strongly suspected, often knew, that ISI spies were actively tipping off militants about upcoming U.S. raids.
Which brings us right back to Raymond Davis. His arrest was such a disaster precisely because he was caught spying on Lashkar-e-Taiba, wasn't he?
Yes. The very group the ISI considered its key proxy force against India. So Davis's activities put the CIA in direct, undeniable conflict with Pakistan's core strategic interests. That's why the CIA stonewalled Pakistan so hard about who Davis really was. It wasn't just about operational security. Admitting he was spying on a prized ISI asset would have been diplomatic dynamite. It confirmed the ISI's deepest fears, that the CIA was waging its own secret war against Pakistan's interests inside Pakistan, culminating, as we mentioned, in that CIA station chief bluntly declaring that Pakistan itself was the enemy.
And yet, despite this complete collapse of trust, the U.S. still had to operate inside Pakistan to get its #1 target, Osama bin Laden.
Right. The May 2011 raid on bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, which was astonishingly less than a mile from Pakistan's top military academy, it was the absolute climax of this whole shadow war architecture. But to get U.S. ground troops, the Navy SEAL teams, into sovereign Pakistani territory without permission, they had to use this legal maneuver known as sheep dipping.
Why was that specific legal designation, sheep dipping, so important for the bin Laden raid? Was it just paperwork, or did it have real consequences if things went wrong?
Oh, it was absolutely critical. Sheep dipping meant that the Navy SEALs were temporarily, on paper, taken out from under their normal Title X military authority. And instead, they were placed under the CIA's Title 50 Covert Action Authority for the duration of the mission. Now, this wasn't just bureaucratic shuffling. It provided the president with crucial legal deniability. It allowed the U.S. military to conduct what was essentially a hostile military operation inside the territory of a supposed ally without formally declaring war. And it meant, technically, legally, the person in charge of the raid wasn't a general, but the CIA director, Leon Panetta.
Panetta, the former congressman, a relative Washington outsider in that world, suddenly he's symbolically at the controls of this massive military operation, famously watching it all unfold in the Situation Room, nervously fingering rosary beads, the sources say.
While General Ashfaq Parvez Kayani, Pakistan's powerful army chief, was only told about the raid after the U.S. helicopters were already leaving Pakistani airspace. He was facing the biggest crisis of his career. He had to choose how Pakistan would react. And according to the analysis in the sources, he made a calculated choice. Better to appear incompetent for somehow failing to notice bin Laden living right under the military's nose, rather than appear complicit in either harboring bin Laden or allowing the U.S. raid.
We also absolutely have to talk about the key human intelligence source for that raid, the Pakistani doctor, Shakil Afridi.
Dr. Afridi, yes. He was the physician the CIA hired to run this fake hepatitis B vaccination campaign in the neighborhood around the compound, Bilal Town in Abbottabad. Now, the sources note his vaccination team never actually got inside bin Laden's compound walls, But one of the health workers did manage to get the cell phone number of someone living inside. And that seemingly small piece of human intelligence was apparently critical in helping confirm the identity of the compound's residents and isolating it electronically before the raid.
But Dr. Afridi's fate, it just brutally illustrates how completely the U.S.-Pakistan relationship had cratered by that point.
Absolutely. After the successful raid, Dr. Afridi was arrested by the ISI. But here's the really telling detail. They didn't charge him with treason or espionage for helping a foreign power. Instead, they convicted him for violating these obscure old British colonial-era laws, supposedly related to having ties with some local warlords. And they sentenced him to 33 years in prison. So the ISI locked up the man who provided the crucial link to help America kill its #1 enemy. It just showed the depth of the bitterness, the irreparable breach of trust between the two countries. So when we sort of pull back, look at the whole 20-year arc of this experiment, we end up right back where we started, facing this core paradox.
Right. The 9/11 Commission, after its investigation, specifically recommended that the CIA should be stripped of its paramilitary functions. They argued the U.S. just couldn't afford to have two separate, competing clandestine military forces, the CIA and military special ops, but instead, the country went in the completely opposite direction.
Yeah. As Michael Hayden, who ran both the NSA and the CIA, later put it, kind of wryly, everything is backwards. Today, the CIA is deeply involved in fighting wars, running lethal drone programs, essentially consumed by manhunting. Meanwhile, the military is pushing harder than ever into the CIA's traditional lane, human spying. The Defense Intelligence Agency is actively building this new, large cadre, hundreds of undercover military spies intended for missions across Africa, the Middle East, Asia. The blurring of the lines isn't temporary, it's now permanent, it's institutionalized, it's funded.
And the sources really argue that the sheer convenience, the allure of killing by remote control, was so powerful that it let the entire country avoid having a necessary public conversation about the nature of lethal force itself, because it felt sanitized, distant.
Richard Blee, again, one of the architects of the armed drone program back in the early days, he later lamented this exact point, this lack of public debate. He felt the political comfort provided by remote killing allowed the U.S. to slide into a state of permanent, undeclared war without ever really grappling with the moral, the legal, the long-term costs.
And that leads us right to the final, really provocative question that the sources seem to pose for us, for you listening. If we as a society have become comfortable, maybe even complacent, about launching a Hellfire missile from a drone to kill a designated enemy in some remote part of the world, because it feels clean, because we feel no immediate risk, should we then be equally comfortable with the idea of a CIA operative walking up to a suspected terrorist on a street in, say, Paris or Hamburg and shooting him in the back of the head, as Blee put it?
That profound gap, that legal and moral disparity between our acceptance of remote, mechanized killing and the visceral horror we'd likely feel about up-close, state-sanctioned assassination. That is the crucial, uncomfortable debate the sources argue America still hasn't truly confronted. And until that happens, the machinery of the shadow war, it seems destined to keep grinding on, regardless of where the enemy is found or what uniform the person pulling the trigger happens to wear.